Yevamos Daf continues the Gemara's discussion of an Amoinis and a Mayavis. The Gemara is continuing its exploration of what is the source of the halacha that a female Amoinis or Mayavis are permitted to marry into Klal Yisrael. The Gemara concludes that, then the Gemara will add a few drushas and Agadata on the topic. Then the Gemara will get into the shayla of what about the daughter of a ger Amoini, is she permitted to kahuna? We know that she's permitted to Klal Yisrael, is she permitted to kahuna? The Gemara will have lengthy discussion on that. So let's begin. The Gemara has been discussing the conversation between Doeg HaAdami and Avner, Sartzava Yisrael, discussing whether or not David was mutter to marry into Klal Yisrael because he's a descendant of Rus Hamayavia. So the Gemara says that Avner and the Chachamim had been faced with a kasha that was asked by Doeg, and they didn't have an answer. So the Gemara says this was answered by Yeser HaYisraeli. Who's Yeser HaYisraeli? So the Gemara says that, first of all, there's a contradiction as to what his name is. He's referred to in Sefer Shmuel as Yeser HaYisraeli, and in Divrei Hayamim he's referred to as Yeser HaYishmeeli. The Gemara brings the psukim that describes him. One says, V'amsha ben Amasa ben Ish Ushmai Yisra HaYisraeli Asher Ba'al Avigail Bas Nachash, that Yeser or Yisra was the daughter of Avigail, daughter of Nachash, and his father was Amasa, and his son was Amasa. And then we have in Divrei Hayamim, it calls him Yeser HaYishmaeli, and it gives the same yichus. So we're talking about the same person. So the Gemara says that he was a Yisraeli. He's called Yishmaeli because he girded himself, he put on a sword like a Yishmael, like a Ishmaelite. And he said anybody who doesn't listen to this halacha that an Amoinis and Mayavis are mutter, and their children are, he will be stabbed with this sword. Because I have a Kabbalah from the Beis Din of Shmuel Haramasi, Amoini v'lo Amoinis, Mayavi v'lo Mayavis. So the Gemara says, do you trust him? Why is it that they seem to, at the time they accepted his word, why is he trusted? The halacha is that if somebody comes and says, I have a Kabbalah, you only use that for halacha if he said that before it was Nageya halacha. If after halacha is already, the question's already on the table, and then he comes and says, oh, I heard a Messiah about this, you don't believe him. Particularly in this case where he had a vested interest because he himself was also descended from Rosh Hamayaviyah. So the Gemara says this is different, and that's because he's quoting Shmuel, and Shmuel was still around at the time, so it would be very easy to go ask Shmuel. So he would not be lying, and therefore his word was accepted. Says Gemara, you still haven't answered the kasha. The kasha was that the reason we are saying that the female Amoinis and Mayavis are allowed to marry into the kahal is because it's not a complaint against them that they didn't bring out water and food to feed Klal Yisrael. So the Gemara's question is there's still complaint against them, even though men are the ones who are supposed to come out. Women should have come to feed the women. Why is it that they didn't come out to feed the women? So the Gemara says, okay, now we'll answer the kasha. The answer is that the Klal Yisrael's women stayed indoors, and therefore there was no one for the Amoinis and Mayavis to greet. Klal Yisrael's women stayed indoors. The Gemara brings two psukim. Kol kvuda bas melech pnima. The princess always stays in the palace, and when Sarah was noticed that she stayed in the tent by the Malachim, like it says, and the answer was Hine Ba'ayel. Okay, it says in the words of Machlokes Tanaim, what is the source of the heter for Amoinis and Mayavis? One quote from the pasuk Amoini and Mayavi, Lo Yave Amoini and Mayavi B'Kal Hashem. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. It's Amoini v'lo Amoinis Mayavi v'lo Mayavis. Rabbi Shimon says it's based on Al Dvar Shleikidmu Eschem B'Lechem U'B'Mayim, that they didn't greet us with bread and water. That's only a complaint against the men, not a complaint against the women. Says Rava a few drashas. The Gemara says that David HaMelech was grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the fact that he had this heter. He said, Patachta li ma'aseiroi, you opened up my restraints. And he said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there were two restraints that I had. One was Ros HaMayaviyah, and the other was Naama HaAmoinis. Naama was married to Shlomo HaMelech, and she was the mother of Rechavam. All Malchi Yisrael came out of her. All Malchi Yehuda came out of her. So that was essential that she be permitted, and that was one of the Patachta l'Moiseroi, Ros and Naama. Says Rava, another drasha. David Melech says in Tehillah Marabos Asisa Ata Hashem Elokai Niflo Yisecha Machshav Yisecha Eleinu. You did many great and wonderful things for me, for us. Hashem, my God, you did things for us. What is he referring to? Who's us? So Rava says he was holding Rechavam on his lap. Rechavam was his grandson, and he said these two psukim, Amoini, Amoinis, and Alvar Shalai Kidmu Eschem. Those were said for me and for you. One for me, one for you. That we have the heter of Amoini v'lei Amoinis and Me'avi v'lei Me'avis based on that. My grandmother was a Me'avis, and your mother is an Amoinis. Says Rava, another drasha. David Melech said in Tehillim, Azamarti hine basi b'megillas sefer kasaf alai. Then I said, I came with a scroll, a sefer written about me. David said, I thought that I was only appointed to become king. Now, when Shmuel came in, anointed me. However, I see that it was written about me well in advance, back in the days of Avram Avinu, when Lot's two daughters, one the father of Ammon and one the father of Moab, they were called Shtei B'nosacha Hanimtza'os, those that are found. And the pasuk about me, it says, Matzasi David Avdi B'Shemen Kachi Mishachtiv. So that reference there is that they were saved back then. Amoini and Mayavis, the daughters of Lot, Amoinis and Mayavis, the fathers of Ammon and Moav are referring to me already way back then. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to a topic in halacha. The Gemara discusses what is the halacha of the daughter of a ger Amoini. So we know that an Amoini himself who converts is not allowed to marry a Jew. An Amoinis who converts is allowed to marry a Jew. The Gemara is now asking, according to the way we understand this question in the beginning, our first approach, an Amoini and an Amoinis who get together, they get married, now they have a daughter. That daughter is definitely mutter to marry into Klal Yisrael, because she's an Amoinis. She's not even an Amoinis, she's the daughter of an Amoinis. Her mother's mutter, she's certainly mutter. The question is she allowed to marry into Kahuna? What's the issue? So we know that a ger is not allowed to marry a kahuna. A gioris is not allowed to marry a kahuna. This woman is the daughter of a ger. She's allowed to marry kahuna. So that's similar to a discussion which we had much later, where it's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. So says the Gemara, who is your question like? Rav Yechanan asked, Ula quotes Rav Yechanan asking, what's the halacha of the daughter of a male and female couple that were both converts from Ammon? So according to Rav Yehuda holds that the daughter of any ger is forbidden to marry a Kohen. Just like a ger is forbidden to marry a Kohen, a ger's daughter is forbidden to marry a Kohen. And he gets that from the fact that a chalal is forbidden to marry a Kohen. A chalala is forbidden to marry a Kohen, and the daughter of a chalal counts as a chalala herself. She's also forbidden to marry a Kohen. So according to him, there's no question. This woman is the daughter of a ger. She's definitely aser. Now, according to Rabbi Yossi, says Rava, there shouldn't be a question here either, because the halacha is that Rabbi Yossi holds that even a ger that's married to a giores, their daughter is kosher for kahuna. So what's the question? He says so explicitly. So either way, according to Rabbi Yehuda, this should be aser, and according to Rabbi Yossi, it should be pasha that it's mutter. So what's Rabbi Yechanan asking? And it's not just that he's asking; he actually goes ahead and says that that this woman is kosher to kahuna, the daughter of a Amoini and Amoinis convert. So the Gemara wants to know who's this chiddush in. So the Gemara says maybe the chiddush is in Rav Yossi, and even though Rav Yossi said the daughter of a ger and gioris is mutter to kahuna, that is not so pashut in the case of an Amoini and an Amoinis. Maybe an Amoini and Amoinis should be aser to kahuna because her father, this girl's father, was an Amoini convert, and he's aser to marry Bekahal. He's allowed to marry an Amoinis, but he's not allowed to marry Bekahal. He's allowed to marry an Amoinis even though she converted and she's a regular Yisraelis. He's allowed to marry her, but he's not allowed to marry anybody else. So maybe this case should be aser as well. So says the Gemara there, why would that be? His mother, this girl's mother, is an Amoinis. She's an Amoinis. Her mother converted. She's a regular Yisraelis. Even though she's a daughter, why should it be any different than the daughter of regular Yerim? Hare, she's an Amoinis, and Amoinis is a permitted. So says the Gemara, maybe the problem is we want to learn from a Kohen Gadol who marries an Almana. The halacha is that a Kohen Gadol who marries an Almana, the daughter of that relationship is forbidden. Now, it's forbidden to marry Kohanim. She's a Chalala, she's forbidden to marry Kohanim. Now, there is no Isser. Well, I should learn from the Kohen Gadol to the Almana, just like that Kohen Hagadol was not allowed to marry this Almana. So here you have this girl's father was an Almani who's not allowed to marry into Yisrael. So just like the daughter of the Almana, the Kohen Gadol is Asur to Kahuna, the daughter of this Almani should be Asur to Kahuna as well. So this Gemara, that would not be a good comparison at all, because the Kohen Gadol to the Almana did an Isser. He was not allowed to marry the Almana. This Almani and Almanis didn't do any Isser. So what should be the issue? So the Gemara says no. Maybe I can show you that the fact that they did an Isser is not a good explanation for why his daughter should be Asur. Look at the Alman and the Kohen Gadol. Don't tell me the reason why their daughter is Asur is because the Kohen Gadol did an Isser. Because there's a case where someone is Asur and her father did not do an Isser, and that's a Chol. Chol marries a regular Yisrael. His daughter is a Chalala. She is Asur to Kahuna. So that's a pircha. You can't tell me that the reason the Kohen Gadol's marriage creates a daughter who's Asur to Kahuna is because there's an Isser there. You see that a Chalal creates an Isser also in there? The Chalal's daughter is Asur to Kahuna, and he didn't do any Isser. So the Gemara says, well, that's different. The Chalal may not have done an Isser, but the Chalal was born in Isser. The Chalal comes from a forbidden marriage of some sort. That's why he's a Chalal. Somewhere along the line, there was an Isser that was performed there, so he's a Chalal. What does that have to do with here? So that's why the Chalal, that's why his daughter is forbidden, because he was born be'Isser. Now, the Gemara says, well, you can't tell me that the girl that's Asur to Kahuna is the one whose father was born be'Isser, born out of an Isser, because look at the Almana Kohen Gadol. They create a daughter who's Asur to Kahuna, and her father is a Kohen Gadol. He wasn't born be'Isser. So obviously being born be'Isser is not the issue. So it says the Gemara, so then putting together an Almana Kohen Gadol, which creates an Isser Kahuna, and a Chalal, which creates an Isser Kahuna, what is the common factor that creates the Isser Kahuna? Common factor must be is that there's an aspect of forbiddenness here. They're not permitted to do what they're doing, and then somewhere there was an Isser, there is an aspect, they are somehow forbidden in part of what they did, and therefore that should also apply to an Almani who's forbidden lavai bekal. So an Almani, even though he's converted, if he marries an Almani, so he's allowed to. Since there's an aspect of the fact that they were Asur on somebody, so the daughter of that union should also be Asur. So that's what we thought. So why is that not true? So the Chiddush is, says Rav Yochanan, that's not true. And the reason is because there is no tzad Isser in the Almani's marriage. The Almani converted, married an Almanis, no Isser was done at any point in this. In the case of the Almana Kohen Gadol, there's an Isser there. In the case of the Chol, it was an Isser somewhere along the line. His parents did an Isser. Those both come from Isser being done somewhere. Here, there's no Isser, and therefore there's no Tzad Avera, and that's why she is. That's why the daughter of an Almanis, and Almani is permitted. So the Gemara is not happy still. So the Gemara says that still wouldn't be a chiddush, because there's no reason for me to think that there should be an Isser. Then since there's no limit to the Isser, there's no reason for me to think that there should be an Isser. So what then is Rav Yochanan being matir? So the Gemara says Rav Yochanan is not being matir and Almani and Almanis who both converted. And they are both Yisrael. In that case, is pashat that according to Yossi that's kosher to Kahuna. Rav Yochanan is being matir a case of an Almani who converted and married a regular Bas Yisrael. That's Asur. An Almani who converted, even though he's a Ger Gomer, but he's also Lavai Bekal, he's not allowed to marry a regular Bas Yisrael. That's Isser. That was B'yasei Ba'aveira. Says Rav Yochanan, that's mutter anyway. His daughter, that Maisa is Asur, but his daughter is not Asur to Kahuna. His daughter is not Asur to Klal Yisrael, obviously, because she's an Almanis. She's a daughter of a Yisraelis, but she's also the daughter of an Almani, and she would be an Almanis, a second generation Almanis. So that's not the Isser. But her parents did an Isser when they made her. So you might learn from Almana Kohen Gadol that she's Asur too. And she's also to Kahuna because of the Isser. Says Rav Yochanan in the Chiddush, she's not Asur. Now the Gemara quotes that this is Taka the case that Rav Yochanan was talking about. The Gemara quotes is a machlokes between Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish on this very subject. The Gemara says that Ravin came and he quoted Rav Yochanan, who said that this case she's kosher, and Reish Lakish said no, this case she is pasul. Now, Reish Lakish says she's pasul, and like we said, because he learns out of a Kohen Gadol who marries an Almana and Isser was done, the daughter is also to Kahuna. Here also, a Ger Amayni who marries a regular Yisraelis and Isser was done, that's an Isser of Lo Yaveh Amayni B'Kal Hashem, and therefore the daughter is Asr to Kahuna. Now, how do we know that Rav Yochanan holds that this case is mutter? So the Gemara says there's a conversation that happened between Rav Yochanan and Rabbi Zakkai. Two different versions of how this conversation happened. In this discussion, we'll see that Rav Yochanan holds that this case is mutter to Kahuna. So the first version is as follows. Rabbi Zakkai brought a brisa. The brisa he said was analyzing the pasuk describing what a Kohen Gadol is supposed to marry, but the same thing applies to Kahanim here. It says Ki im psula me'am avikach isha. He's supposed to marry a psula from his am. So the Gemara says Amav is may Amav is extra. It could have said Ki im psulas Amav. What's the extra phrase, the extra mem there where it says may Amav? So that's to tell me, says the Brisa, that he's allowed to marry a Gioris Mikana. Gioris Mikana, the Gemara understands as meaning a girl whose parents were both Gerim, even if they were both, let's say, Amayni or Amaynis, since they didn't do an Isser, that's mutter. As we said earlier, that's permitted. There's no Isser that was done in her parentage, and she's not an Isser Amayni because she's female. Now, that's kosher to Ikuna. So said Rabbi Zakkai, the implication over here is, the Gemara doesn't spell it out here, but the Gemara spells it out in the next line. The implication is that it's only if both parents are converted Amayni and Amaynis, that's where the daughter is mutter to Kahuna. If one of them is a Yisraelis without any Amayni Yichas, not a converted Amaynis, that would be Usr because there's an Isser in that marriage, and therefore her daughter would be Usr to Kahuna. That's the implication that Rabbi Zakkai said. And Rav Yochanan disagreed, and from there we see that Rav Yochanan holds that it is a kosher. How did Rav Yochanan disagree? So he said, because I learned this drasha differently than you. What did he say to him? So even within this version of the conversation, there's two versions as to what Rav Yochanan said. According to the first version, he said, no, my drasha of Amav and Mei Amav is to include that a Kohen is mutter to marry a girl who comes from a Beis Amimin, from two Ams, meaning from Ammon and Yisrael together. Now the Gemara says, what does Ammon and Yisrael together mean? If we were talking about Ammon and Yisrael, meaning that he's an Ammoni convert and she's an Ammonis convert, and they're called to Amimin because she's a regular Yisraelis, because she's mutter, even though she's an Ammonis by birth, that can't be what he was referring to, because that even Rabbi Zakkai said is mutter. The part of his drasha also said that that's mutter. So Rav Yochanan must have been referring to a case where an Ammoni married a regular Bas Yisrael, and that's why it's called two Amimin, one's Ammon and one's Yisrael, and he clearly holds that it's mutter for the daughter to marry Kohanim. Now the second version of what he said to them is that he said, my drasha is from Amav, Mei Amav, to include a marriage between an Ammoni and a Yisrael, and Ammon specifically because Mei Amav means two nations, and Ammon is viewed as a nation which is two nations. Why is Ammon viewed as a nation which is two nations? Because in Ammon, some of them are mutter to Yisrael, some of them are usher. The men are usher, and the women are mutter. This is why Ammon is called two nations. That's Ammamin. So he was talking about an Ammoni who marries a regular Yisraelis, and he said that the daughter of such an interaction is mutter in a Yisraelis. Okay, so here we have our source that Rav Yochanan, at least according to the first version, we have our source that Rav Yochanan holds that the daughter of an Ammoni and a Yisraelis is mutter to Kahuna, even though their marriage was a Be'isr. Says the Gemara, according to the second version, that the lima that he brought of Amav Mei Amav specifically includes someone from Ammon. What would be his source of the daughter of a Mitzri Sheni? The halach is that a Mitzri is not allowed to marry into Yisrael himself or his child, Mitzri convert, that is, but the third generation is allowed to. So if you have a Mitzri Sheni, his daughter should be mutter to marry Yisrael, but what would be the halacha if he marries a Yisraelis? He was not allowed to marry a Yisraelis. He's only a Sheni. his child is not a mitzvah anymore, but it's the child of a marriage b'isser. How do you know that she's allowed to marry Kahanim? Now, according to the first verse, it's not a problem, because Rav Yochanan's drasha of Amav Me'amav was only if it's someone from two different nations. Could be Mitzri and Yisrael, it could be Ammoni and Yisrael. According to the second version, it was specifically Ammon. So where do you see that if it's a Mitzri and Yisraelis together, that the daughter is allowed to marry into Yisrael? It says the Gemara simply, maybe Rav Yochanan would just learn it out of Ammoni. He has a pasuk, according to the second version, that teaches that an Ammoni who marries Yisraelis, the daughter is mutter to Kahuna. Learn from there to a Mitzri Sheni that marries a Yisraelis. So the says no, because there's a pircha. It's a very obvious reason why there's a greater leniency in the case of an Ammonis, and that's because females in Ammon are mutter, and that doesn't apply to Mitzri. So that can't be the reason, because look at a Mitzri Sheni who marries a Mitzris Sheni. Their daughter is mutter to Kahuna. Nothing wrong with her. She's a third generation convert from Mitzrayim. Everything's fine with her. And there is no leniency in her heritage of the fact that she's from a nation where the females are mutters. Obviously, that's not what causes the heter. Rashi says, no. You can't learn from her. She is only mutter because her parents didn't do an Isser. Her parents were a Mitzri Sheni and a Mitzris Sheni. There's no Isser there. So the Gemara says, but you can learn to the case of an Ammoni. You have a Perchanan from the case of an Ammoni who married Yisraelis. They did do an Isser and their daughter's mutter to Kahuna. So the Gemara says you have Tzad HaShavesh Abahan. The common factor between the two of them that their daughter is permitted is that even though they are forbidden in parts of Kol Yisrael, still their daughter is permitted. So therefore I could learn the same thing to a daughter of a Mitzris, of a Mitzri and a Yisraelis. Says Rabbi Yosef. Now we move on before we get to the second version of Rabbi Yochanan's conversation with Rabbi Zakkai. Says Rabbi Yosef, I had heard from Rabbi Huda that there was a drasha on the words Amav and May Amav, that is an extra mem where it says May Amav. I didn't know what the drasha is. Now I know what the drasha is. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the second version of the conversation between Rabbi Zakkai and Rabbi Yochanan. This is brought by Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, and it starts with a different version of the brisa. It's the same conclusion, the same halacha that they're arguing over, but there's a different version of the brisa and Rabbi Yochanan's response to the brisa. So, according to this version, Rabbi Zakkai came and he brought a brisa, and the brisa listed a number of cases about an Ammonis and the status of her daughter. That is, we're not sure what's meant by an Ammonis here, but the simplest understanding, at least for starters, is that it's talking about a female Ammonis who converted, and she is now giving birth to a child b'kedusha. So the first statement, we'll have a number of cryptic statements, and then Rav Yochanan will go through them and explain what they mean and why he argues on how one of them was brought. So the first one is that an Ammonis woman is kosher. Her daughter from an Ammoni is puzzle. Her son from an Ammoni, that is puzzle. Her daughter from an Ammoni is kosher. This is all true, says the brisa, if it's an Ammoni and an Ammonis that converted. But if she has a daughter from an Ammoni, implication being who did not convert, that daughter will be puzzle. So now, Rav Yochanan said, this is wrong. Teach this brisa outside the Beis Medrash because it's wrong. And he's going to go through it and show which halacha he holds as wrong, and then we'll see what this machlokes is about. So first of all, he said that a Isha Ammonis is kosher. That's for sure true. It says Ammoni v'lei Ammonis. The fact that her daughter from an Ammoni, if this woman converts and she marries an Ammoni, and she has a daughter from him, that's possible for sure. She has a son from him, that's possible because that'll be a second generation Ammoni who's usher. If she has a daughter, that's kosher. So what is that talking about? So you have here, you had an Ammonis convert who has a daughter from an Ammoni, and we said it's kosher. So is kosher for her to marry to Kahal, or is kosher for her to marry Kahanim? So if you mean L'Kahal, that can't be the Chiddush of this brisa, because that's Pashut. Her mother is a converted Ammonis can marry Bekal. She, who's a daughter of a converted Ammonis, could for sure marry Bekal. Must be saying to Kahuna. She's allowed to marry Kahanim. So therefore, this brisa is now saying that the daughter of a converted Ammoni and Ammonis are allowed to marry into Kahuna. Now the brisa goes further and says this is only true about an Ammoni and an Ammonis that converted, but if he's an Ammoni, that's puzzle. Then the daughter is a puzzle. What does this mean? If you mean that it's a Ammoni and Ammonis who converted, that was the case we just discussed. So it must be referring to an Ammoni who married a Bas Yisrael. We're no longer talking about an Ammonis by birth who converted. We're talking about an Ammoni who married a Bas Yisrael. And that's what he said. That's halacha that's wrong. So therefore, you see, that's the case that he argues, the same case as we said earlier. That's the case, and here's the source that Rav Yochanan, this is the second version of the source that Rav Yochanan holds that the daughter of an Amoni and a Yisraelis is mutter to Kohanim. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to the next phrase which we had seen in our Mishnah, and that's a machlokes between Rav Shimon and the Chachamim. What is the halacha of a female mitzris? So the halacha we had seen was as follows. We saw, of course, that an amoinis is mutter right away, a mitzris, but an amoini is also forever. Male amoinis generation after generation are also, there is no heter at any point. Mitzri, though, a third generation mitzri is permitted. The question is, what's the halacha of a mitzris? So Rav Shimon said, a mitzris is permitted right away. She's just like an amoinis is permitted right away. A mitzris is permitted right away. The Chachamim argued on that, and the Chachamim said, no, a mitzris has no special leniency. She's not like an amoinis. She's like a mitzri, and she's also until third generation as well. Now, the Rav Shimon had said that there's a kavachomer from amoinis to mitzris. Amoinis from the nation of Ammon, which is forbidden for every generation, the women are permitted right away. Mitzris, who's from a nation that is permitted after 3 generations, the women should certainly be permitted right away. The Chachamim had said, if that's your only source of this, there's a kasha on your kavachomer. Rav Shimon said there's no kasha on the kavachomer, and it's not my only source. So the Gemara wants to know, what was the kasha on the kavachomer? So the Gemara quotes Rabba Bar Chana named Rav Yochanan, who says the kasha on the kavachomer is that I have a hoichiach, I have some source to show that you could have a case of something which is only usher until the 3rd generation, but there's no difference between males and females. That shows that the Kavachomer is wrong. The Kavachomer had said that anything where the Yisr only applies to 3 generations, I could learn from Amoinis, Kavachomer from Amoinis, that it'll apply only to the males and not to the females. Where do I see something that only has an Isser? What else only has an Isser 3 generations? And where it says Arias, a man is not allowed to marry his daughter, not allowed to marry his granddaughter. There is no Isser between him and his great and his great granddaughter, the 3rd generation from him. There's no Isser Dairaisa, there isn't Isser Darbanan, but there's no Isser Dairaisa. Yet the Isser of Arias applies both to males and the females. Everybody's Isser, and specifically that could refer to his son's daughter or his daughter's daughter. So the Isser applies both to males and to females. And this is something which only applies for 2 generations, and the 3rd one is permitted. So you see, it's a pircha, the Kavachomer is wrong. So the Gemara says, no, you can't ask a kasha from him there. The case of Arias is a special stringency. Arias carry kares. Kares is the reason, because they are a kares iser, that's the reason that they apply to males and to females. We're talking about mitzri. Mitzri doesn't carry kares, and therefore won't apply to males and to females. Says Gemara, you can't tell me the reason it applies to females as well as because there's kares, because I'll show you mamzer. Mamzer does not apply to the isser to marry a mamzer does not carry kares, but the isser mamzer applies both to males and to females. So says Gemara, mamzer is different. Mamzer is also for all generations. Mamzer is not a rayas. The reason that mamzer is also to females is because that goes through all generations out there. So we're back to being stuck here. What causes the Isser to apply to females? Is it kares, or is it that it applies to all generations? We have 2 different examples. Each one shows that the other one is wrong. Each example shows that this factor doesn't apply by the other one, so we need the tzad shavet. So what is the tzad shavet between them? So the Gemara says the tzad shavet is that there's Isser. There's an aspect of Isser that happened here, and it applies both to males and to females. And therefore, you should also include a mitzri. And a mitzri is that they should also apply to males and to females because there's a tzad isser there. That's the Chachamim's argument. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon will answer, no, there's a different tzad shavet shaben. The tzad shavet shaben is that there's kares involved. Arayas carry kares in the isser. Mamzerim come from an isser kares. And therefore, it's only something which carries kares somewhere in it that applies to males and to females. But Rabbi Shimon will say, I'm talking about, I could learn from Amoini and Amoinis that there's no Isser on the females in something that's 3 generations. Now, how are the Rabbanan going to answer that? So, the Rabbanan will say, I have a different Yechiach, there's something else that doesn't carry kares, and that's a chalal. But we're only going to bring from a cholol which is chayve asay. A cholol, sometimes a cholol is a person born from a forbidden marriage. There are different types of chololim. Some come from an Isser Lav, some come from an Isser Asay. Now, Isser Asay, first of all, that's a machlokes whether that creates cholol or not. We're going with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov that they do create an Isser Asay. An example of an Isser Asay is the Isser of a Kohen Gadol to Almana, to a Kohen Gadol to a non-Psula, that is. Almana is a Losasay, but a non-Psula who's not an Almana and not a Grusha. There, it's only where it says Ki im Psula me'ama v'ikachisha, that's an Asay. It's only an Isser Asay on a Kohen Gadol to marry a non-Psula. Therefore, the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov would say that gives birth to a chalola, and you're going to learn from there that it applies both to males and to females. Now, we cannot learn from a lav, from a chalol created from a lav, for the simple reason that a mitzri is only forbidden by an asay, and therefore we would always end up asking the pircha that all these things are lavin. So we got to talk about, if we want to knock this out once and for all, we got to bring from a cholol, which is created for males and females, from an asay. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon will answer and they say, I don't hold like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So according to me, this pircha doesn't work. And according to me, this tzad hashava doesn't work, and therefore, according to me, my kal v'chomer from Ammoni is good. According to you, who hold that this is a problem here, I do have another source for this. I do have a Mesorah that this is the true halacha. Says the Gemara, we have a brisa. The brisa says, Rabbi Shimon says, I'm telling you a halacha, and I also have a pasuk that backs me up. What's that? The Torah, when it says that a mitzri cannot marry until the third generation, and then in the third generation they can, it says, Banim asher yivoldu lehem dar shlisha yavo lehem mekal Hashem. Banim, sons that are born third generation, those are permitted to marry. Obviously, daughters were permitted to marry all along. Rabbi Yehuda rejects that. He says, no, if you look, it says, Asher yivoldu lehem, the focus is on that are born. Anyone that's born becomes permitted in the third generation, and that's therefore applies to both sons and to daughters. It's a good thing that Rabbi Yehuda holds that way, otherwise Rabbi Yehuda would have a big problem. It's because of a different opinion that Rabbi Yehuda holds. If you combine with what he holds here, you have a big issue. What else? What's his other issue that he holds? So the Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda's shita in Maseches Kiddushin is that someone who's also lava b'kal, like a mitzri, is also to marry even a giores, a ger and a giores. That's a machlokas. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's also. Therefore, we have a big problem here. Is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, how does a mitzri ever get to be the third generation? We said that a third generation mitzri is allowed to marry Yisraelis, but a first generation and a second generation are not allowed to. So who do they marry? Don't tell me a mitzvah, because any convert is called Kal Hashem. So they're not allowed to marry anybody. So they can't have a second generation. Therefore, it's a good thing that he says that it's got to be Asher Yivoldu. Therefore, he holds that females are also. Female mitzvahs is also. She also has the halachic status of a mitzvah. Now, a mitzvah marries a mitzvah. He's allowed to marry a mitzvah because she also has the same isser. So says the Gemara, no, maybe I'll tell you he could have said something else. He could have said that you have a third generation mitzvah if he marries somebody by isser. So the Gemara says, no, the Torah is not going to tell me a halacha that they're permitted for somebody who did an isser. The Torah doesn't say halachas for people who did isser. You're not allowed to do it. If you do it, then it'll become mutter 3 generations. That's not how we talk. So Gemara says, that's not true. I'll show you a case where we did. It says that if somebody does an isser, his child's a mamzer. So you see, the Torah is talking about somebody who does an isser. This says, no, you can't compare that. Here the Torah is telling you about an isser that's created by one isser. One isser leads to another isser. That it'll tell you. Then an isser creates a heter. The Torah doesn't speak about that. Someone says, yes, it does. It talks about a machzor gushaso. Somebody is not allowed to remarry his wife after she was married to somebody else. That is, if she was married to him, he divorced her. She married someone else, he divorced her. To go back to her original husband is usher. However, we have a limud that we learned from there, is that even though she is usher to remarry to him, her children who will be born from that marriage are mutter. So, because it says he toyeva ve'ein boneha toyeva, it's a limud based on that. So it says Gemara. So you see that we're learning a heter out of an isser that they did. If they did this isser, she does this isser, then her children will be a mutter. So that's not a kasha. The pasuk there is telling me the chiddush that she's usher to kahan from that point. That you learn by diak that her children are mutter. That wasn't the Torah's main focus, and therefore it makes sense that the Torah told you the iser. You can learn an heter out of that. That's not a problem. But to say that the Torah wrote the whole parsha of dor shlishi of a mitzri only for a case of iser, that doesn't make sense.